The alarm clock rang at 4:30 a.m., just like every morning for the past 3 years. Selena Rodriguez rolled out of bed, her joints protesting the early hour. At 51, her body remembered every hard landing, every emergency flight, every moment when seconds meant the difference between life and death. But those days were behind her now. She pulled on her orange safety vest and work boots, the same ritual she had performed over 1,000 times since becoming a sanitation worker for the city. The uniform was different from the flight suit she once wore, but the purpose remained the same: serving her community. Selena grabbed her thermos of black coffee and headed to the garage where the garbage truck waited. The massive vehicle hummed to life under her careful inspection. She checked the hydraulics, tested the compactor, and examined the safety equipment with the same precision she once used for helicopter pre-flight checks.
"Morning, Rodriguez," called Miguel, her partner for the past 2 years. He was a good man, 20 years younger, with 3 kids at home and dreams of becoming a firefighter. "Ready for another beautiful day in paradise?" Selena smiled quietly. Miguel always tried to lighten the mood, but he had no idea about her past. To him, she was just another city worker putting in her time until retirement. She preferred it that way. They drove through the quiet streets of Riverside Heights, a middle-class neighborhood where families raised children and elderly couples tended their gardens. The houses stood close together, 3- and 4-story apartment buildings mixed with small, single-family homes. Selena knew every street, every alley, every fire hydrant location. Old habits never died. Their first stop was Maple Street, a narrow road lined with oak trees and parked cars. Selena operated the truck's automated arm while Miguel handled the manual pickups. They worked in comfortable silence, their routine as smooth as a well-rehearsed dance. "You know," Miguel said as they moved to the next block, "my wife keeps asking what you did before this job. I told her you never talk about it, but she's curious. She thinks you were probably something important." Selena focused on positioning the truck next to a row of garbage bins. "Everyone has a past, Miguel. Sometimes it's better left there." As they continued their route, Selena noticed things others missed. The way Mrs. Patterson's newspapers piled up when she was visiting her daughter. How the Johnson family always put out extra bags on Fridays after their weekly gatherings. The subtle changes in the neighborhood rhythm that spoke of lives lived quietly, safely.
She also noticed the building code violations, the blocked fire escape on Elm Street, the overloaded electrical panel behind the corner market, the narrow gap between buildings that would challenge any emergency vehicle. These observations filed themselves away in her mind, muscle memory from a different life. The morning routine was something Selena had come to treasure. There was a meditative quality to the repetitive motions, the predictable progression through familiar streets. After 15 years of high-stress emergency flights where every decision carried life or death consequences, the simple clarity of collecting garbage felt like a form of healing.
She remembered her first day on the job 3 years ago. How strange it had felt to climb into a truck instead of a helicopter cockpit. The controls were different. The perspective was different. But the fundamental requirement was the same: attention to detail, responsibility for expensive equipment, and service to people who depended on her to do her job correctly. Her supervisor, Janet Morrison, had been skeptical at first. "You're overqualified for this position," she had said during the interview. "What happens when something better comes along?" Selena had answered honestly, "I'm not looking for something better. I'm looking for something different." Janet had studied her carefully, perhaps sensing that there was more to the story than Selena was willing to share. But she had given her the job, and Selena had proven to be exactly what she claimed to be: a reliable, competent employee who showed up on time, did her work without complaint, and didn't cause problems. The truck rumbled through the residential sections, past the elementary school where children would soon be arriving for another day of classes, past the small businesses that formed the commercial heart of the neighborhood. Selena knew the owners of most of these establishments, not personally, but in the way that service workers know the rhythms of the places they serve. Tony's Market opened at 6 a.m. sharp every day except Sunday. The owner, an elderly Italian man, always waved from behind the counter when they collected his garbage. The flower shop next door generated surprisingly little waste, but what they did throw away was often beautiful. Wilted roses, broken vases, damaged ribbon that Selena sometimes thought deserved a better fate than the landfill. At 11:30 a.m., they stopped for lunch at Riverside Park. Miguel pulled out his sandwich and started scrolling through his phone. But Selena preferred to sit quietly on a bench, watching the world around her. Children played on swings while their mothers chatted nearby. An elderly man fed pigeons from a paper bag. Everything seemed peaceful, normal. "Check this out," Miguel said, showing her his phone screen. "Another helicopter crash upstate. Pilot didn't make it. These guys have dangerous jobs, you know?" Selena glanced at the article without comment. She had known the risks when she chose aviation. Every pilot did, but that was yesterday's world, yesterday's responsibilities. Today, she collected garbage and went home to her small apartment where nobody expected her to save lives or make split-second decisions that affected other people's futures. "Yeah," she said simply. "Dangerous work." The news article brought back memories she had worked hard to bury. The crash looked similar to one she had witnessed 5 years ago, when a medical helicopter had gone down during a storm. She had been flying search and rescue that night, one of 3 aircraft combing the mountains for survivors. They had found wreckage, but no survivors, and Selena had been the one to radio back the devastating news to the families waiting at the hospital. That was the nature of emergency aviation. You saved more lives than you lost, but the ones you lost stayed with you forever. Every pilot carried ghosts, and Selena had collected more than her share during 15 years of flying people to safety. After lunch, they finished their route through the residential section and moved toward the apartment complexes on the east side of their territory. These buildings housed more people in less space, families struggling to make ends meet, young professionals starting their careers, elderly residents living on fixed incomes. The Riverside Towers complex consisted of 4 buildings, each 6 stories high, arranged around a central courtyard. Selena had always paid special attention to this area. The buildings were older, constructed in the 1970s with building codes that wouldn't pass today's safety standards. The fire escapes showed rust, and the spacing between buildings was minimal. As they collected garbage from the complex, Selena noticed a few things that concerned her. A maintenance van had been parked in front of Building C for several days, and she could see workers going in and out with electrical equipment. The smell of burned wiring had been noticeable for the past week. "Miguel," she said quietly, "do you smell that?" He sniffed the air. "What, the garbage?" "No, something else. Electrical." Miguel shrugged. "Probably just the maintenance work. They've been updating something in that building all week." Selena nodded but made a mental note. In her previous life, she would have reported such concerns immediately. As a sanitation worker, it wasn't her responsibility. But old instincts were hard to ignore. The apartment complex reminded her of a particularly challenging rescue she had flown 7 years ago. An elderly woman had suffered a heart attack in a 6th-floor apartment, and the building's narrow courtyard had made helicopter landing impossible. Selena had performed a rooftop extraction, lowering a rescue basket while maintaining a precise hover in difficult wind conditions. The woman had survived, but barely, and the experience had reinforced Selena's respect for the challenges that tall residential buildings pose during emergencies. They finished loading the truck and were preparing to head back to the depot when Selena's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived alone with her cat. Selena, smoke coming from building across the street. Should I call someone? Selena looked up from her phone toward the apartment complex they had just left. A thin trail of gray smoke was visible from one of the upper windows of Building C. Miguel, she said, her voice suddenly sharp with authority. We need to go back. The smoke was thicker now, dark gray tendrils curling from a fourth-floor window of Building C. Selena felt her heart rate increase, not from panic, but from the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with recognizing danger. Her mind automatically began calculating wind direction, building layout, and evacuation routes. Miguel was still confused. Should we call the fire department? Yes, call 911 now, Selena said, already moving toward the building entrance. Tell them potential structure fire, Riverside Towers Building C, multiple families at risk. She pushed through the glass doors into the lobby. The smell of burning electrical components was stronger here, mixed with something worse. Melting plastic and the beginning of real fire. An elderly man sat in the lobby chair, reading a newspaper, apparently unaware of the danger above him. Sir, Selena approached him calmly but firmly. There's a fire in the building. You need to leave immediately. Use the main exit. Don't use the elevator. The man looked confused. Fire? I don't see any fire. Fourth floor, spreading fast. Please trust me and leave now. Something in her voice convinced him. He folded his newspaper and walked toward the door, still looking puzzled but following her instruction. Selena found the building directory. 48 units total, probably 120 to 150 residents depending on family sizes. The fire escape was on the north side, but she remembered seeing rust damage during her regular routes. The stairwell would be the primary evacuation route, but if the fire spread to the lower floors, people would be trapped. The building's layout was typical for 1970s construction, a central core with apartments branching off long hallways. The electrical and utility systems ran through interior walls, which meant that fires could spread hidden from view until they broke through into living spaces. Selena had seen similar buildings during her aviation career, often from above as she landed on their rooftops during medical emergencies. Miguel appeared beside her, slightly out of breath. Fire department is on the way. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes was too long. Selena could see smoke beginning to seep from around the elevator doors. The fire was spreading faster than most people would expect. Miguel, I need you to go door to door on the first and second floors. Tell everyone to evacuate immediately via the main stairwell. Don't let anyone use the elevator. Can you do that? Yeah, but what about you? I'm going up to check the upper floors. Miguel grabbed her arm. Selena, that's crazy. We're not firefighters. We should wait for the professionals. She looked at him steadily. Those professionals are 12 minutes away. People might die in 12 minutes. Something in her eyes made him release her arm. He had never seen this side of his partner before, this quiet command presence that seemed to come from some deep well of experience. Be careful, he said. Selena was already heading for the stairwell. The narrow concrete steps were filling with smoke, but visibility was still manageable. She climbed quickly, her work boots echoing in the enclosed space. On the second floor, she could hear Miguel knocking on doors, his voice urgent but controlled. The stairwell brought back memories of training exercises she had participated in during her aviation career. Helicopter crews were required to understand building construction and evacuation procedures because they often worked with ground-based emergency responders. She had climbed stairs like these during simulation exercises, learning how smoke behaved in confined spaces and how quickly fire could spread through older buildings. The third floor was where things got serious. The smoke was thicker here, and she could hear the crackling sound that meant active fire somewhere nearby. She started at the east end of the hallway, apartment 3A. She knocked firmly. Fire department? Everyone needs to evacuate immediately. It wasn't exactly true, but people responded to authority in emergencies. A young woman opened the door holding a baby. What's happening? Building fire, spreading fast. Take your baby and go down the main stairwell right now. Don't stop. Don't go back for anything. Move. The woman didn't argue. She grabbed a diaper bag and headed for the stairs. Selena continued down the hallway, door by door. Most people responded quickly once they understood the danger, but apartment 3F was a problem. She could hear voices inside, an argument in Spanish between what sounded like an elderly woman and a younger man. Selena pounded on the door. Emergencia! Incendio en el edificio! Salgan ahora! The door opened to reveal a teenage boy and an elderly woman in a wheelchair. The woman was refusing to leave, insisting that the boy go without her. She says she's too old, too slow, the boy explained. She says I should save myself. Selena looked at the wheelchair, then at the narrow stairwell. Standard evacuation procedures didn't cover this situation, but her aviation training did. In emergency medicine, you always had protocols for moving immobile patients. What's her weight? She asked the boy. Maybe 110 pounds. Why? Selena did the calculation quickly. She could carry that much, but not down 6 flights of stairs. However, the wheelchair could be lifted by 2 people. Listen carefully, she told the boy. We're going to carry her down in the chair. You take the front, I'll take the back. When I say move, you move. When I say stop, you stop. Understand? The boy nodded, suddenly looking much older than his years. Señora, Selena addressed the elderly woman directly in Spanish. I was a pilot. I've carried people out of dangerous places before. Trust me. The woman looked into Selena's eyes and saw something that convinced her. She nodded once. They lifted the wheelchair and began the careful descent. Selena called out instructions. Step down. Wait. Step down. Wait. The smoke was getting thicker, but they made steady progress. By the time they reached the ground floor, Miguel was leading the last group of lower floor residents toward the exit. The evacuation reminded Selena of a particularly challenging rescue mission she had flown 8 years ago. A family had been trapped in their car after a bridge collapse, and the only access was by helicopter winch. She had spent 45 minutes hovering in turbulent air while rescue personnel were lowered to extract the victims one by one. The precision required, the patience, the absolute focus on the task at hand. Those same skills were serving her now in a completely different context. Outside, a crowd had gathered across the street. Selena helped the boy wheel his grandmother to safety, then did a quick head count. She estimated about 40 people had evacuated, which meant at least 20 were still inside, probably on the upper floors. Miguel, how many more buildings are there? 3 more, but they're not on fire. Selena looked at the other buildings. They were identical in construction, connected by covered walkways and shared utility systems. If the fire spread to the roof or basement levels, all 4 buildings could be at risk. The sound of sirens grew louder. Help was coming, but she could see flames now in several 4th-floor windows. The fire was accelerating. Captain Torres of the fire department arrived just as Selena was organizing the evacuated residents into groups by building and floor. His team immediately began setting up equipment while he assessed the situation. "Who's in charge here?" he called out. Several people pointed to Selena, who stepped forward. "Selena Rodriguez, City Sanitation. I've evacuated approximately 40 people. Estimate 20 to 30 still inside, upper floors." Captain Torres studied her carefully. Something about her calm demeanor and precise information delivery suggested experience beyond garbage collection. Any injuries? None so far. 1 elderly wheelchair user required assistance. Fire appears to have started on the fourth floor, electrical in origin. Building has compromised fire escape on north side. Main stairwell is still clear, but filling with smoke. The captain nodded. Her assessment was thorough and professional. We'll take it from here. Please keep the evacuees back. Selina moved toward the crowd, but stopped when she heard shouting from one of the fourth floor windows. A woman was leaning out, calling for help. Behind her, visible through the smoke, were two small children. "Captain," Selina called out. "Window 4C, woman with children." The fire crew was still setting up their ladder truck. The woman at the window was coughing heavily, and the children behind her looked terrified. Selina made a decision that would have been automatic in her previous life, but felt momentous now. She approached Captain Torres. "I can get to them," she said quietly. "I know the building layout, and I have experience with emergency evacuations." "Ma'am, I appreciate your help, but this is a job for professionals." "Captain, I was an ambulance helicopter pilot for 15 years. I've extracted people from worse situations than this. Your crew needs time to set up equipment. Those kids don't have time." Torres looked at her again, this time seeing past the orange safety vest to the person underneath. "What's your plan?" "Service elevator shaft on the west side. It's not running, but the shaft provides access to each floor. I can climb up, get to the family, and bring them down via the main stairwell. That shaft could be compromised by the fire. Maybe. But it's their best chance right now." The captain was quiet for a moment, weighing risk against necessity. Finally, he nodded. "Take a radio. If I call you back, you come back immediately." Selina clipped the radio to her vest and headed for the building's service entrance. The elevator shaft was accessible through a maintenance door on the ground floor. Inside, she could see the cables and counterweights that normally operated the elevator car. She tested the cable tension and began climbing. Her hands remembered the feel of ropes and cables from helicopter rappelling training. Her legs remembered the rhythm of controlled ascent under pressure. This was different from flying, but the core skills translated. The elevator shaft was darker than the stairwell, but it was also cleaner air. The fire hadn't yet compromised this part of the building's structure. Selina climbed steadily, counting floors by the elevator door openings she passed. Her breathing was controlled, her movements efficient. Years of physical training for aviation emergencies had prepared her for exactly this kind of exertion. The first floor passed quickly, second floor still manageable. By the third floor, the heat was noticeable, and smoke was beginning to drift into the shaft from the building's ventilation system. Fourth floor was where things got dangerous. She could hear voices through the wall. The family was still in their apartment, but the smoke was thicker up here. Selina found the access panel for the fourth floor and carefully opened it. The hallway was filled with gray smoke, but visibility was still adequate. She moved quickly to apartment 4C and knocked. "Emergency evacuation! Open the door!" A woman's voice responded, weak and coughing. "We can't get out. The hallway is full of smoke." "Ma'am, I'm here to help you." "Open the door slowly." The door opened to reveal Maria Santos, a young mother with two children, a boy about 8 and a girl about 5. They were all coughing, and the children looked terrified. "My name is Selina. I work for the city, and I'm here to get you out safely. We're going to walk to the stairwell together. I want everyone to hold hands, and we'll move as a group. Can you do that?" The mother nodded, gathering her children close. "Is it safe?" Selina looked at the smoke in the hallway, then back at the family. "It's safer than staying here. Trust me." They formed a chain, Selina leading, then the 8-year-old boy, then his little sister, then their mother bringing up the rear. Selina kept one hand on the wall for guidance and moved steadily toward the stairwell. The smoke was thicker now, and the heat was increasing. The children were scared but following instructions. When they reached the stairwell, Selena could see that the situation had deteriorated. Smoke was rising from the lower floors, meaning the fire had spread. "Stay close to the wall," she instructed. "If anyone feels dizzy, tell me immediately." They began the descent. Third floor, second floor. On the first floor, they could see light from the main exit, but they could also see flames flickering at the far end of the lobby. The fire had reached the ground level. Selena's radio crackled. "Rodriguez, status report. Exiting with family of 3. First floor lobby compromised by fire. Copy. Exit through the west emergency door. Crew standing by." They made it outside, where paramedics immediately checked the family for smoke inhalation. The children were scared, but unharmed. Their mother hugged Selena tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing my babies home." Captain Torres approached as the family was being treated. "Good work in there. We've got the fire contained to Building C, but it was close. If it had spread to the other buildings." Selena nodded. "Any other residents unaccounted for?" "2 more families on the 5th floor. My crew is bringing them down now." Over the next hour, Selena watched the firefighters complete their work. The building was saved, though apartments 4A through 4F were heavily damaged. All residents were accounted for, with only minor smoke inhalation injuries. As the crowd began to disperse, Miguel approached her. "Selena, I need to ask you something. What you did in there, that wasn't normal. That was professional. What did you do before this job?"
Selena looked at the damaged building, then at the families who were alive because someone had acted quickly. "I was a helicopter pilot. Medical evacuations, emergency transport. I carried people out of places where they couldn't save themselves." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because that was then. This is now." She paused. "Or at least, it was until today." Miguel studied her face. "You miss it, don't you?" "The flying?" "I missed helping people. Flying was just how I did it." She looked around at the crowd of residents who were safe, the children who would go home to their families. "Maybe I was wrong to think I had to choose between them." News of the apartment fire spread quickly through the neighborhood. By the next morning, local TV crews were interviewing residents who had been evacuated. Maria Santos appeared on the morning show, holding her children and telling the story of the city worker who saved our lives. "She wasn't a firefighter," Maria explained to the reporter. "She was just a woman who collected our garbage every week. But when the fire started, she became something else. She became our hero." Selena watched the news coverage from her apartment while drinking her morning coffee. She felt uncomfortable with the attention, but understood why the story mattered to people. It reminded them that heroism could come from unexpected places. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Miguel's number. "You see the news?" he asked. "Yeah. I wish they wouldn't make such a big deal out of it." "Selena, the fire chief wants to meet with you. Captain Torres called the department. They're interested in talking to you about your background." Selena sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "What kind of talking?" "The kind where they offer you a job." The apartment where Selena lived was modest but comfortable, a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house. She had chosen it specifically because it was quiet, affordable, and close enough to walk to work when the weather was good. The living room windows faced east, filling the space with morning light that she had grown to treasure during her 3 years of early rising. On the walls were a few photographs from her aviation days, not the dramatic action shots that some pilots displayed, but quieter moments. Her crew standing beside their helicopter after a successful rescue. A sunset view from the cockpit during a routine transport flight. A group photo from the annual safety training conference where pilots from different services came together to share techniques and stories. She had put these photos away when she first moved in, unable to look at reminders of what she had lost. But gradually, as the sharp edge of grief had softened, she had brought them back out. They no longer represented a past that was gone forever, but simply a different chapter in a life that was still being written. That afternoon, Selena found herself in the office of Fire Chief Patricia Williams, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and the confident bearing of someone who had earned respect through experience, not politics. "Miss Rodriguez," the chief began, "Captain Torres tells me you showed exceptional judgment during yesterday's emergency. He also mentioned that you have aviation experience." 15 years as an ambulance helicopter pilot, Selena confirmed, both military and civilian medical transport. "Why did you leave aviation?" Selena had been expecting this question. "Budget cuts eliminated my position 3 years ago. The hospital couldn't afford to maintain their helicopter program. I needed work, and the city was hiring." "But you chose sanitation over trying to find another pilot position?" "I was 51 years old in a field that prefers younger pilots. I had offers from private companies, but they involved relocating, and I liked this community. I thought I was ready to do something simple, something that didn't involve life and death decisions." Chief Williams leaned back in her chair. "Yesterday suggests you weren't as ready for simple as you thought." "Yesterday was different. People needed help, and I had skills that could help them. It felt natural." The chief studied her carefully. There was something about Selena's demeanor that suggested depths not immediately visible. Her responses were thoughtful, measured, honest, without being overly revealing. It was the behavior of someone who had learned to assess situations carefully before committing to action. "Tell me about your aviation experience. What kind of situations did you handle?" Selena considered how much detail to provide. Mountain rescues mostly, hospital transport between facilities, some search and rescue work with the Coast Guard, weather emergencies, medical emergencies, occasionally structural collapse situations where ground access was limited. "Combat experience?" 2 deployments, Iraq and Afghanistan, medical evacuation and personnel transport. Chief Williams nodded. Military aviation experience was always valuable, but medical evacuation pilots had skills that translated directly to civilian emergency response. They understood triage, they were accustomed to working under pressure, and they knew how to make quick decisions with limited information. "Captain Torres wants to recommend you for our emergency response consultant program. We work with experienced professionals from various backgrounds, former military, medical personnel, aviation specialists. They help us with training scenarios, emergency planning, and sometimes active situations where their expertise is valuable." Selena considered this carefully. Would I still keep my city job? The consulting work would be part-time, mostly evenings and weekends. But if you're interested in a career change, we're always looking for qualified candidates for our full-time emergency management positions. What would that involve? Coordinating multi-agency responses, developing evacuation plans, training community volunteers. It's not firefighting, but it uses the same skills you demonstrated yesterday: quick thinking, leadership under pressure, and the ability to see the big picture during emergencies. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Chief Williams explaining the department structure, their current challenges, and the role that someone with Selena's background might play in addressing those challenges. The fire department had been working to improve their community preparedness programs, recognizing that trained civilians could be invaluable during large-scale emergencies. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Take your time, but don't wait too long. The community needs people like you." That evening, Selena walked through Riverside Heights, following the same route she drove every morning in the garbage truck. The streets looked different now, not just as a collection route, but as a community she had helped protect. She stopped at the apartment complex where the fire had occurred. Building C was cordoned off with yellow tape, but the other 3 buildings were already back to normal. Children played in the courtyard while their parents watched from benches. Life had returned to its regular rhythm. Mrs. Chen approached her as she stood looking at the damaged building. "Selina, I saw you on the news. I always knew you were special." "I just did what anyone would do." "No," the elderly woman said firmly. "Most people would have waited for someone else to help. You didn't wait. That's what made the difference." Mrs. Chen was 82 years old, a retired school teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years. She had seen changes come and go, watched young families move in and grow old, witnessed the slow evolution of a community that took care of its own. She had also developed a sharp eye for character, honed through decades of working with children and their parents. "You know," Mrs. Chen continued, "I used to be a teacher. You learn to recognize certain qualities in people: leadership, responsibility, the willingness to put others first. You have those qualities, but you've been hiding them. I wasn't hiding anything. I was just doing my job. Yesterday, you did much more than your job, and I think you know that." As Selina walked home, she thought about the choice ahead of her. She could return to her quiet life, collecting garbage and going unnoticed. Or she could accept that some people are meant to serve in more visible ways, even when they prefer the shadows. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Miguel. "Boss wants to see you tomorrow. Don't worry, you're not in trouble. I think they want to give you some kind of award." Selina smiled to herself. Awards were nice, but they weren't why she had climbed into that burning building. She had done it because people needed help, and she had the skills to provide that help. Everything else was just noise. But maybe it was time to admit that she missed being the person who could help in ways that others couldn't. Maybe it was time to stop hiding behind an orange safety vest and accept that some gifts were meant to be used, not buried. The city council meeting was larger than usual, with local news cameras and an audience that filled the main chamber. Mayor Davidson stood at the podium, reading from a prepared statement. "It's not often that we have the opportunity to recognize extraordinary heroism from within our own city workforce," he began. "Last week, one of our sanitation employees demonstrated the kind of courage and quick thinking that saved multiple lives during a dangerous building fire." Selina sat in the front row, wearing her best dress instead of her work uniform. She felt uncomfortable with the formal attention, but understood that the ceremony meant something to the community. "Selina Rodriguez exemplifies the best of public service," the mayor continued. "Her actions remind us that heroism comes in many forms, and that the people who serve our community every day are capable of extraordinary things, when circumstances demand it." The mayor called her to the podium to receive a commendation from the city. As she walked forward, Selina saw familiar faces in the audience: Miguel and several of her co-workers from the sanitation department, Captain Torres and other firefighters from the emergency response, and Maria Santos with her children. "Miss Rodriguez," the mayor said as he handed her the framed certificate, "is there anything you'd like to say to the community?" Selina looked out at the audience, then spoke simply and directly. 3 years ago, I thought my days of helping people in emergencies were over. I was wrong. This city has good people who look out for each other, and sometimes they just need someone with the right skills to step forward. I'm proud to serve this community, whether that's collecting garbage or helping in emergencies." The audience applauded, and Selina returned to her seat. After the ceremony, she was approached by several people, including Chief Williams. "Have you made a decision about our offer?" the chief asked. "I have. I'd like to accept the consulting position, but I want to keep my sanitation job too." "Both?" "I like the routine of my regular work, and I like knowing the community from that perspective. But I also want to be available when people need help in ways that I'm uniquely qualified to provide." Chief Williams smiled. "I think we can make that work. Your schedule with us would be flexible anyway. Emergency management isn't a 9-to-5 job." Over the following weeks, Selina settled into her new dual role. 3 days a week, she worked her regular sanitation route with Miguel. 2 days a week, she worked with the fire department on emergency planning and community preparedness programs. The emergency management work felt familiar in the best possible way. She helped develop evacuation plans for schools and senior centers, trained community volunteers in basic emergency response, and worked with local businesses to improve their safety protocols. Her aviation background proved valuable in ways she hadn't expected. Her experience with weather assessment helped the department improve their severe weather response plans. Her knowledge of medical transport procedures improved their coordination with hospital emergency services. Her understanding of aircraft operations helped them develop better protocols for helicopter landing zones during medical emergencies. But it was her understanding of the community, gained through 3 years of collecting garbage from every neighborhood, that made her most effective. She knew which elderly residents might need extra help during evacuations, which buildings had structural issues that could complicate emergency response, and which community leaders could be trusted to help organize assistance during crises. The training sessions she conducted for community volunteers were well attended and practical. Unlike some emergency preparedness programs that focused on abstract scenarios, Selena's training dealt with real situations that could actually occur in their specific neighborhood. She taught people how to recognize early signs of gas leaks, how to safely evacuate multi-story buildings, and how to organize neighborhood response teams during power outages or severe weather. Miguel noticed the change in his partner immediately. "You're different," he told her during their lunch break one afternoon. "More like yourself, if that makes sense." "It makes perfect sense," Selena replied. "I spent 3 years trying to be someone I'm not. Turns out I can be both people, the one who collects garbage and the one who saves lives. I don't have to choose." Their conversation was interrupted by Selena's emergency radio crackling to life. "All units, structure collapse at Morrison construction site. Multiple workers trapped. Emergency management requested on scene." Miguel looked at her expectantly. This was her call to make. Selena stood up, clipped her emergency gear to her belt, and headed for her truck. "Cover the rest of my route, okay? I'll make it up to you later." "Go save people," Miguel called after her. "It's what you do." The construction site was chaos when Selena arrived. A scaffold had collapsed during renovation work on an old warehouse, trapping 3 workers under twisted metal and concrete debris. The scene was dangerous and complex, requiring careful coordination between multiple emergency services. Selena quickly assessed the situation with Captain Torres, who had arrived moments before her. The collapsed scaffold had created a precarious pile of steel tubing and wooden planks, with concrete chunks scattered throughout. 2 workers were visible and conscious, but pinned beneath the debris. A 3rd worker was completely buried, his location known only because his co-workers could hear him calling for help. "What's the plan?" Selena asked, donning a hard hat and safety vest. "Heavy rescue is en route, but they're 20 minutes out," Torres replied. "We need to stabilize this mess before we can start extraction." One wrong move and the whole pile could shift. Selena studied the debris field with the trained eye of someone who had seen many accident scenes from above. During her aviation career, she had often been first on scene at construction accidents, vehicle crashes, and industrial incidents. She understood structural stability, weight distribution, and the physics of collapse. "The main support beam is still intact," she observed, pointing to a steel I-beam that ran horizontally through the middle of the pile. "If we can secure that, we can create a safe working space around the victims." Working with the fire department's technical rescue team, Selena helped coordinate the stabilization effort. Her aviation experience proved valuable in ways she hadn't expected. Helicopter pilots learned to assess landing zones quickly, evaluating surface stability and load-bearing capacity under pressure. The same skills applied to understanding how collapsed structures might behave under the stress of rescue operations. The first worker, a young man named Danny, was extracted after 40 minutes of careful work. He had a broken arm and multiple cuts, but was conscious and talking. The second worker, an older man named Frank, took longer to free because a steel beam had to be lifted and supported before he could be safely removed. The third worker, buried completely under debris, presented the greatest challenge. His name was Carlos, and he had been standing directly under the scaffold when it collapsed. The rescue team could hear him responding to their calls, but reaching him required removing several tons of material without causing further collapse. "We need a precision approach," Selena told the rescue coordinator. "Like defusing a bomb, every piece we remove changes the balance of the whole structure." The extraction took 3 hours. Carlos emerged with serious injuries but alive, conscious, and able to speak to his family while being loaded into the ambulance. All 3 workers would recover fully. As the scene was being cleared, Captain Torres approached Selena. "You've got good instincts for this work. Have you thought about expanding your role with us?" "Actually, yes. I've been thinking about it a lot." 6 months after the apartment fire, Selena had found her rhythm in the dual role. Her emergency management work had expanded to include regional coordination with other cities, and she had been invited to speak at a national conference on community preparedness. But her most meaningful work remained local. She had helped establish a neighborhood emergency response team in Riverside Heights, training residents to assist during disasters. Maria Santos had become one of her most dedicated volunteers, motivated by her own experience during the fire. "People listen to you," Maria told her during one of their training sessions. "They trust you because you're one of us, but they also respect you because you know what you're doing." The neighborhood emergency response teams had become a model that other communities were starting to adopt. The concept was simple but effective: train local residents in basic emergency skills, establish communication networks that could function during disasters, and create neighborhood-level leadership that could coordinate with professional emergency services. Selena's teams learned how to perform basic first aid, how to safely shut off utilities during emergencies, how to organize evacuation procedures for apartment buildings and senior housing, and how to establish temporary shelters in schools and community centers. The training was practical and relevant to their specific community. Unlike generic emergency preparedness programs, Selena's approach focused on the actual risks and resources available in Riverside Heights. Participants learned about the specific buildings in their neighborhood that might pose evacuation challenges, the location of emergency supply caches that the city had established, and the radio frequencies that emergency services used during major incidents. One of the most successful innovations was the Building Captain program. Selena had identified key residents in each apartment building and housing complex, training them to take leadership during evacuations and to maintain basic emergency supplies for their neighbors. These building captains knew their neighbors' needs, who might require mobility assistance, who had medical conditions that required special attention, who might need language interpretation during emergencies. Mrs. Chen had become the building captain for her block, embracing the responsibility with enthusiasm. "It gives me purpose," she told Selena. "At my age, it's good to know I can still help people." The program was tested during a severe winter storm that knocked out power to most of the city for 3 days. The neighborhood emergency teams activated automatically, checking on elderly residents, sharing food and heating resources, and maintaining communication with city emergency services. No one in Riverside Heights required emergency evacuation, and there were no weather-related injuries or deaths in the area. "Your teams performed better than some of our professional response units," Chief Williams told Selena after the storm. "They were organized, they stayed calm, and they took care of their own people without waiting for outside help." Selena was developing lesson plans for expanding the program to other neighborhoods when her emergency radio activated with a familiar urgency. Emergency management to Scene 47, helicopter down in Riverside Park. Multiple casualties, immediate response required. The irony wasn't lost on her as she drove toward the park where she had eaten lunch countless times during her sanitation routes. A medical helicopter had experienced mechanical failure during landing, crashing just short of the emergency landing zone at the nearby hospital. When she arrived, she found a scene of controlled chaos. The helicopter had come down hard, but the pilot had managed to avoid the playground area where children often played. The aircraft was damaged but not burning, and the crew was alive but injured. Captain Torres met her at the command post. "Pilot has a serious leg injury, can't move." Co-pilot is conscious but trapped in the cockpit. Patient they were transporting is critical. Heart attack victim who needs immediate surgery. Selena surveyed the wreckage with professional eyes. The helicopter was a model she knew well, similar to the aircraft she had flown for years. The access points, the safety systems, the likely injury patterns. It was all familiar territory. What's the status on extraction equipment? Heavy rescue is 20 minutes out. Paramedics are on scene, but they can't get to the patient without compromising the pilot. Selena approached the aircraft carefully, noting the damage patterns and structural integrity. The cockpit was crushed on one side, but the patient compartment appeared intact. Most importantly, she could smell aviation fuel, but no signs of fire. She spoke to the pilot through the broken windscreen. "I'm Selena Rodriguez, Emergency Management. I used to fly these birds. Can you hear me clearly?" The pilot, a woman in her 30s, looked up with relief. "Thank God. I can't move my left leg, and my co-pilot is unconscious. The patient in back is coding." Selena assessed the situation quickly. The co-pilot's unconsciousness was likely due to impact trauma, but his position suggested he was breathing normally. The pilot's leg injury would require careful extraction to avoid further damage, but the heart attack patient needed immediate medical attention that couldn't wait for heavy rescue equipment. "I'm going to get your patient out first," she told the pilot. "Then we'll work on getting you and your co-pilot free." "You okay with that priority?" The pilot nodded. "Patient first. Always patient first." Selena worked her way to the rear of the helicopter, where the patient compartment door was jammed but not completely blocked. Using techniques she remembered from helicopter emergency procedures, she managed to force the door open enough to access the interior. The heart attack victim was an elderly man, unconscious and connected to portable life support equipment that had been damaged in the crash. His vital signs were weak but stable. Working with the paramedics on scene, Selena carefully extracted the patient from the aircraft and transferred him to a waiting ambulance. The extraction took 12 minutes, less time than it would have taken for heavy rescue to arrive and set up their equipment. With the patient safely on his way to the hospital, Selena turned her attention to the flight crew. The co-pilot had regained consciousness and was alert enough to assist with his own extraction. The pilot's leg injury was serious, but not life-threatening. "You did good work in there," Captain Torres told her as the last crew member was loaded into an ambulance. "Textbook helicopter emergency response." "It's like riding a bicycle," Selena replied. "Some skills stay with you." The helicopter crash brought back memories that Selena had thought were safely buried. Standing beside the wreckage, she remembered dozens of similar scenes from her aviation career. Mechanical failures, weather-related crashes, human error incidents that turned routine flights into emergencies. But this time, instead of grief or regret, she felt a sense of closure. She had been able to help in a situation where her specific knowledge and experience made a difference. The skills she had developed during 15 years of flying hadn't been wasted when she left aviation. They had simply been waiting for the right moment to be useful again. As the emergency vehicles departed and the scene was secured for investigation, Selena stood looking at the damaged helicopter. 3 months ago, she might have felt sadness at seeing aircraft wreckage, a reminder of the career she had left behind. Today, she felt something different, a sense of completion. She wasn't a helicopter pilot anymore, but she was still someone who could help when aviation emergencies occurred. She wasn't flying rescue missions, but she was still saving lives. The tools had changed, but the purpose remained the same. Her radio crackled with a message from the Emergency Operations Center. "Rodriguez, excellent work today. The patient made it to surgery and is expected to recover fully. Both crew members stable. Clean extraction, no secondary injuries." Selena smiled as she drove back toward Riverside Heights. Tomorrow, she would be back on her sanitation route with Miguel, collecting garbage and maintaining the quiet rhythm of community service. Next week, she would be back in the Emergency Operations Center, planning responses to disasters that hadn't happened yet. Both roles mattered, Both served her community, and both allowed her to be exactly who she was meant to be, someone who helped people, whether they needed their garbage collected or their lives saved. As she passed the apartment complex where everything had started, she saw children playing in the courtyard and families going about their daily routines. Building C had been repaired and reoccupied, life returning to normal in the way that communities always heal. But Selena knew that normal was relative. Emergencies would come again, disasters would strike, people would need help in ways they couldn't anticipate. When those moments arrived, the community would be ready because ordinary people had learned to do extraordinary things. The evolution of Selena's role continued over the following months. The success of the Neighborhood Emergency Response Program had attracted attention from state emergency management officials, and she was invited to help develop similar programs in other communities throughout the region. "What you've created here is exactly what we need," said Director Sarah Martinez from the State Emergency Management Agency. "Community-based preparedness that actually works because it's designed by people who understand the community they're serving." The state contract allowed Selena to reduce her sanitation work to 2 days a week while expanding her emergency management responsibilities. She traveled to rural towns and urban neighborhoods, helping local leaders establish their own emergency response teams and communication networks. Each community presented unique challenges. Rural areas had different risks and resources than urban neighborhoods. Coastal communities worried about hurricanes and flooding, while mountain towns focused on wildfire preparedness and winter storm response. But the underlying principles remained the same. Know your neighbors, understand your local risks, and train people to help each other during emergencies. One of the most rewarding projects was working with a rural farming community that had been devastated by flooding 2 years earlier. The flood had revealed how unprepared the community was for major disasters, and local leaders were determined to do better. "We lost everything because we didn't know what to do," explained Janet Morrison, the town's mayor. "The water came up faster than anyone expected, and we had no plan, no organization, no way to help each other." Selena spent 3 weeks in the community, working with residents to identify evacuation routes, establish emergency communication systems, and train response teams. The farmers proved to be quick learners, bringing the same practical problem-solving skills they used in agriculture to emergency preparedness. "These people already know how to work together," Selena told Director Martinez during one of their weekly check-ins. "They just needed someone to help them organize that cooperation for emergency situations." The program launched during severe weather season, and the community had multiple opportunities to test their new capabilities. When flash flooding threatened the area again, the response was dramatically different. Early warning systems gave residents time to evacuate safely. Emergency teams coordinated rescue efforts for stranded livestock, and temporary shelters were established quickly and efficiently. "Nobody got hurt this time," Mayor Morrison told Selena afterward. "Same weather, same river, but completely different outcome because people knew what to do." Miguel had successfully completed fire department training and was now working as a full-time firefighter and emergency medical technician. He often participated in the community preparedness programs that Selena organized, bringing his new professional knowledge to the volunteer teams. "It's weird," he told her during one of their occasional coffee meetings. 3 years ago, we were just collecting garbage together. Now we're both emergency responders, but we got here completely different ways." "The important thing is that we're both doing work that matters," Selena replied. "Whether you get there through formal training or life experience, what counts is being ready to help when people need it." Their friendship had deepened through the shared understanding of what it meant to serve others during their most vulnerable moments. Miguel had discovered his calling through watching Selena's example, while Selena had rediscovered hers through being willing to act when action was needed. The relationship between professional emergency services and community volunteer teams had also evolved in positive ways. Initially, some firefighters and police officers had been skeptical of civilian emergency response groups, worried that untrained volunteers might interfere with professional operations or put themselves in danger. but the track record of Selena's programs had changed those attitudes. The volunteer teams were well-trained, disciplined, and focused on supporting rather than replacing professional responders. During major incidents, they provided crucial assistance with evacuations, logistics, and communication that allowed professional crews to focus on the most dangerous and technical aspects of emergency response. "Your people make our job easier," Captain Torres told Selena. "They know their neighborhoods, they're already organized, and they don't try to be heroes. They just do the practical work that needs to be done." The integration was so successful that the fire department had started including community team leaders in their emergency planning meetings. When major incidents occurred, volunteer coordinators worked directly with professional incident commanders to ensure seamless cooperation between all response elements. Chapter 8. Testing under pressure. The real test of the community preparedness systems came during a severe winter storm that brought ice, high winds, and widespread power outages to the entire region. The storm lasted 3 days and knocked out electricity to over 200,000 people, including most of Riverside Heights. Selena was at the Emergency Operations Center when the storm hit, coordinating between professional response agencies and the community teams scattered throughout the affected area. Communication was challenging because many cell towers were down, but the emergency radio networks that had been established during the preparedness training remained functional. "Building captains are reporting in," Maria Santos told her over the radio. Maria had become one of the most capable team leaders, managing emergency response for 3 apartment complexes in her area. "We've got power out everywhere, but no injuries reported. Starting welfare checks on elderly residents now. Similar reports came in from other neighborhoods throughout the city. The community teams had activated automatically when the power went out, following the procedures they had practiced during training exercises. Building captains were checking on vulnerable residents, emergency supplies were being distributed from the cache locations, and temporary warming centers were being established in buildings that had backup generators. This is how emergency response is supposed to work, Chief Williams told Selena as they monitored the situation from the operations center. Professional crews handling the big technical challenges, community teams taking care of local needs, nobody waiting around for someone else to solve their problems. The storm caused significant damage throughout the region, but the prepared communities experienced far fewer casualties and recovered much more quickly than areas without organized response capabilities. The success of the program was noticed by emergency management officials at the national level, and Selena was invited to present her community preparedness model at a federal emergency management conference. "What you've demonstrated," said Dr. Robert Chen, a disaster response researcher from the National Emergency Management Institute, "is that resilient communities are built from the bottom up, not the top down. Professional emergency services are essential, but they can't be everywhere at once. Communities that can take care of themselves during the critical first hours of a disaster have much better outcomes." The conference presentation led to additional opportunities for Selena to share her approach with emergency management professionals from around the country. She began receiving invitations to consult with communities that had experienced major disasters and wanted to improve their preparedness for future events. One of the most challenging assignments was working with a coastal town that had been devastated by a hurricane 2 years earlier. The community was still rebuilding, and residents were struggling with the trauma of the disaster and fear of future storms. "We did everything we were supposed to do," explained Carol Washington, the town's emergency management coordinator. "We evacuated when told. We followed all the official procedures. But when we came back, everything was gone, and it took months to get basic services restored. People feel helpless." Selena spent several weeks in the community, listening to residents describe their experiences and working with local leaders to develop preparedness strategies that addressed both the practical and emotional aspects of disaster resilience. "You can't eliminate the risk," she told a community meeting attended by over 200 residents. "But you can reduce your vulnerability by being organized, by knowing your neighbors, and by having plans that don't depend entirely on outside help arriving quickly." The program that emerged was tailored specifically to hurricane preparedness, with emphasis on rapid damage assessment, debris clearance, and community communication systems that could function when normal infrastructure was destroyed. Residents learned how to organize neighborhood work teams for post-storm cleanup, how to establish temporary medical aid stations, and how to coordinate with relief agencies when outside help arrived. "It's not about becoming completely self-sufficient," Selena explained to Dr. Chen during one of their regular consultations. "It's about being able to take care of immediate needs and maintain community organization during the period between when disaster strikes and when professional help arrives." The success of these community preparedness programs had attracted attention beyond emergency management circles. Urban planners, social workers, and community development specialists were studying Selena's approach as a model for building stronger, more resilient neighborhoods. "What you're really doing," observed Dr. Lisa Park, a sociologist who had been following the program's development, "is rebuilding social capital. You're giving people reasons to know their neighbors, skills to help each other, and confidence that they can solve problems together. That has benefits that go far beyond emergency preparedness." Indeed, the communities with active emergency response teams were showing improvements in other areas as well. Crime rates were lower, elderly residents reported feeling safer and more connected, and local business districts were more vibrant. The same neighborhood networks that prepared for disasters also organized community cleanups, supported local businesses, and provided informal social services for residents who needed help. Chapter 9: Recognition and Expansion. 3 years after the apartment fire that had changed everything, Selena found herself standing at another podium, this time addressing a national conference of emergency management professionals. The audience included directors from major cities, federal agency officials, and researchers from universities across the country. "Community preparedness isn't about turning civilians into professional responders," she told the audience. "It's about recognizing that communities are made up of people with diverse skills and experiences who can contribute to resilience if they're organized and trained appropriately." She described the evolution of her programs, from the simple neighborhood teams in Riverside Heights to the complex multi-community networks that now served populations of over 100,000 people. The statistics were impressive. Communities with active preparedness programs experienced 60% fewer casualties during emergencies, required 40% less outside assistance during disasters, and recovered to normal operations 50% faster than unprepared areas. But for Selena, the most meaningful measure of success was simpler: people helping their neighbors during difficult times. After her presentation, she was approached by representatives from several federal agencies who were interested in scaling up her approach to serve entire states or regions. The Department of Homeland Security was particularly interested in funding demonstration projects that could serve as models for national implementation. "We've been looking for community preparedness approaches that actually work in practice, not just in theory," explained Director James Sullivan from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. "Your programs have the track record and the scalability that we need." The federal contract would allow Selena to establish a formal training institute that could prepare community preparedness coordinators for deployment anywhere in the country. It would also fund research into the most effective techniques for building social cohesion and emergency resilience in different types of communities. "It's a big opportunity," Chief Williams told her during one of their planning meetings, "but it means you'll probably have to give up your sanitation work entirely. You'll be traveling constantly, training people, managing a much larger organization." Selena considered this carefully. The garbage collection work had been the foundation of her community knowledge and the source of her credibility with residents who might otherwise be skeptical of outside experts. It had also provided a sense of routine and normalcy that balanced the intensity of emergency response work. "I think it's time," she said finally. "The local programs are established and running well. Maria and the other team leaders can handle the day-to-day coordination. And if I'm going to help other communities build this kind of resilience, I need to focus on that full-time." Miguel, now a senior firefighter and emergency medical technician, had mixed feelings about his former partner's transition to national prominence. He was proud of her accomplishments, but worried that success might change her in ways that would reduce her effectiveness. "Don't forget where this all started," he told her during their farewell lunch. "The reason people trust you is because you've been in their shoes. You've done the unglamorous work, you've lived in the community, you understand what ordinary people go through. That's what makes you different from the typical expert who shows up with theories, but no practical experience." "I won't forget," Selena promised. "And this isn't goodbye. We'll be working together on the regional training exercises, and you'll probably get tired of seeing me at community meetings." The transition from local emergency coordinator to national program director required Selena to develop new skills. She had to learn about federal contracting procedures, academic research methodologies, and large-scale program management. She also had to navigate the politics of emergency management, where different agencies, levels of government, and professional organizations often had competing priorities and approaches. But the core mission remained the same: helping communities develop the knowledge, skills, and organization necessary to take care of themselves during emergencies while working effectively with professional response agencies. Her first major assignment under the federal contract was to develop a preparedness program for a region that had been hit by multiple disasters over the past 5 years. Wildfires, floods, and severe storms had repeatedly overwhelmed local emergency services and left communities struggling to recover. "We need something different," said Regional Emergency Manager David Torres, no relation to Captain Torres from Riverside Heights. "The traditional approach of just telling people to evacuate when told and wait for help isn't working. Our communities are too remote. Our response resources are too limited, and the disasters are too frequent and severe." Selena spent 2 months traveling through the region, meeting with community leaders, attending town halls, and observing the aftermath of recent emergencies. What she found was a population that was resilient by necessity, but lacked organization and coordination. "These people know how to survive," she told her research team. "They know how to deal with power outages, how to clear roads blocked by fallen trees, how to take care of sick neighbors when the hospital is 50 miles away. They just need help organizing those capabilities so they can be more effective during major disasters." The program that emerged was adapted to the specific challenges of rural communities: long distances between homes, limited communication infrastructure, and heavy reliance on volunteer emergency services. Instead of neighborhood teams organized around apartment buildings and city blocks, the rural model used geographic districts based on watershed areas and road networks. "It's the same principles applied to different circumstances," Selena explained to Dr. Chen during one of their progress reviews. "Know your neighbors, understand your risks, organize your resources, and train for the most likely scenarios. The details change, but the fundamentals remain the same." Chapter 10: Personal Growth and New Challenges. The success of the Rural Preparedness Program led to additional contracts with communities facing different types of challenges. Urban areas wanted help with evacuation planning for high-rise buildings and dense neighborhoods. Coastal communities needed assistance with hurricane and tsunami preparedness. Industrial areas required specialized planning for chemical emergencies and infrastructure failures. Each project taught Selena something new about community resilience and human behavior during crises. She began to understand that effective emergency preparedness was as much about psychology and social dynamics as it was about technical procedures and equipment. "People need to feel capable, not helpless," she explained to a group of graduate students who were studying her methods. "If you train them only to follow orders and wait for professional help, they'll panic when circumstances don't match their expectations. But if you teach them to assess situations, make decisions, and take appropriate action, they'll be effective even when things don't go according to plan." This insight led to significant changes in how her training programs were structured. Instead of emphasizing rigid procedures and chain-of-command authority, the new approach focused on decision-making skills, situational awareness, and adaptive leadership. Community volunteers learn to evaluate rapidly changing conditions, prioritize multiple competing demands, and coordinate with various agencies and organizations whose roles might overlap or conflict during complex emergencies. These were the same skills that Selena had developed during her aviation career, adapted for civilian emergency response. "You're essentially teaching people to think like pilots," observed Dr. Park during one of her research visits. "Pilots have to make quick decisions with incomplete information, coordinate with multiple other parties, and adapt to changing conditions while maintaining focus on their primary mission. Those are exactly the skills that community emergency leaders need." The comparison was apt, and Selena began incorporating aviation decision-making models into her training curricula. Concepts like crew resource management, situational awareness, and risk assessment proved highly relevant to community emergency response. Her personal life had also evolved during this period of professional growth. The small apartment that had been adequate for a quiet sanitation worker was no longer suitable for someone who traveled constantly and hosted meetings with officials from various agencies. She moved to a larger place with space for a home office and guest accommodations for the colleagues and trainees who frequently visited. More significantly, she had begun developing closer personal relationships with some of the people she worked with regularly. Dr. Chen had become not just a professional collaborator, but a close friend whose insights helped her understand the broader implications of her work. "You've created something unprecedented," he told her during one of their evening conversations after a particularly challenging community training session. "Most disaster preparedness programs are designed by people who've never actually been in disasters, implemented by bureaucrats who've never lived in the communities they're supposed to serve, and tested only in simulations that bear little resemblance to real emergencies. Your approach is different because it's based on genuine experience and real community knowledge." Maria Santos had also become a close friend and trusted colleague. Her evolution from frightened fire victim to capable emergency coordinator illustrated the potential that existed in every community for ordinary people to develop extraordinary capabilities. "You changed my life," Maria told Selena during a break in one of the regional training conferences. "Not just by saving my family from the fire, but by showing me that I could be someone who helps other people during their worst moments. I never thought I had that kind of strength." "You always had it," Selena replied. "You just needed circumstances that let you discover it." The relationship with Chief Williams had also deepened beyond professional collaboration. The fire chief had become something of a mentor, helping Selena navigate the complex politics of emergency management while maintaining focus on the practical mission of saving lives and protecting communities. "You've got good instincts for this work," Williams told her during one of their quarterly planning meetings. "But remember that success brings its own challenges. The more visible you become, the more people will want to use your reputation to advance their own agendas. Stay focused on what actually works, not what sounds good in speeches or looks impressive in reports." This advice proved prescient when Selena was approached by a private consulting firm that wanted to license her training methods for commercial distribution. The company promised to scale up her programs rapidly, reaching thousands of communities within 5 years and generating substantial revenue. "It's a tempting offer," she told Miguel during one of their periodic check-ins. "They have the resources to implement this approach much faster than I can through government contracts and nonprofit organizations." "But do they understand what makes it work?" Miguel asked. "Can they maintain the community focus and practical orientation? Or will they turn it into just another bureaucratic program that looks good on paper but doesn't actually help people?" After careful consideration, Selena declined the commercial licensing offer. She had seen too many effective programs lose their impact when they were scaled up by organizations that prioritized growth and profit over quality and community connection. Instead, she chose to expand more gradually through partnerships with universities, nonprofit organizations, and government agencies that shared her commitment to community-centered approaches. This meant slower growth, but better quality control and stronger connections to the communities being served. The comprehensive test of Selena's expanded programs came during a massive regional emergency that challenged every aspect of the preparedness systems she had helped develop. A severe earthquake struck during winter storm conditions, creating a complex disaster that combined immediate structural damage with prolonged power outages, transportation disruption, and communication failures. The earthquake hit at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, strong enough to damage buildings and infrastructure across a 3-county area. Within minutes, the emergency communications networks that Selena's teams had established were crackling with status reports from community coordinators throughout the affected region. Building damage on Maple Street, but no collapse, reported one team leader, conducting systematic searches now. Power out in our entire district, but backup communications functional. No serious injuries detected so far, came another report. From the Regional Emergency Operations Center, Selena coordinated information flow between the community teams and professional response agencies. The picture that emerged was serious but manageable. Significant infrastructure damage, but relatively few casualties, thanks largely to the preparedness training that had taught people to take protective action quickly and effectively. Your community teams are providing better damage assessment information than our official channels, reported State Emergency Manager Jennifer Walsh. They know their neighborhoods intimately, they're already organized, and they're reporting systematically instead of just calling 911 with random complaints. The earthquake had damaged several major transportation routes, making it difficult for professional emergency services to reach some affected communities. But the prepared communities were able to handle immediate needs independently while waiting for outside assistance to arrive. We've got search and rescue teams organized and working, reported Maria Santos from her coordination post at the Riverside Heights Community Center. Medical team is treating minor injuries and has identified 3 people who need hospital transport when roads are clear. Emergency shelter is operational with supplies for 200 people for 3 days. Similar reports came in from the other prepared communities, while unprepared areas struggled with basic organization and communication. The contrast was dramatic and undeniable. This is exactly what we hoped to achieve, Dr. Chen told Selena as they monitored the response from the operations center. Communities that can take care of immediate needs competently and coordinate effectively with professional services. The prepared areas are actually helping to free up resources for the places that really need outside assistance. The earthquake response validated the community preparedness model and attracted attention from emergency management officials internationally. Delegations from Japan, New Zealand, and Chile, countries with extensive earthquake experience, visited to study Selena's approach and consider adapting it for their own communities. We have very sophisticated professional response capabilities, explained Dr. Akiko Tanaka from the Japanese Emergency Management Agency. But we still struggle with community-level organization and coordination. Your methods might help us improve resilience at the neighborhood level. The international interest led to consulting opportunities that Selena hadn't anticipated, but also to challenges in adapting her community-focused approach to different cultural and political contexts. What works in American communities might not work the same way in places with different social structures, cautioned Dr. Park. You'll need to understand local customs, authority relationships, and communication patterns before trying to implement these programs elsewhere. Selena spent several months studying international emergency management approaches and consulting with cultural specialists before accepting her first overseas assignment. The project was in a Central American country that had been repeatedly hit by hurricanes and wanted to improve community resilience in rural areas. The principles should translate, she told her research team before departing. People everywhere need to know their neighbors, understand their risks, and organize for mutual assistance. The specific methods might need to be adapted, but the fundamental approach should work. The international project proved both challenging and rewarding. Language barriers, cultural differences, and limited resources required significant modifications to training methods and organizational structures. but the underlying concept of community-based preparedness proved universally relevant. These people already have strong community connections, Selena observed after her first month in the field. They help each other during normal times. They just need assistance organizing that cooperation for emergency situations. Working with local leaders and translators, she developed training programs that built on existing social networks and traditional leadership structures. Instead of imposing American-style organizational models, the programs incorporated local customs and decision-making processes. The results were encouraging. Communities that completed the training showed improved coordination during subsequent hurricane threats, reduced casualty rates during flooding events, and faster recovery from infrastructure damage. "You have learned to work with our culture instead of against it," said local coordinator Carlos Mendez. "Too many outside experts try to change how we organize ourselves. You helped us organize better within our own traditions." Chapter 12: Legacy and Continuation. 5 years after the apartment fire that had changed everything, Selena found herself reflecting on the unexpected direction her life had taken. What had begun as a single act of helping neighbors in distress had evolved into a national program that was changing how communities prepared for and responded to disasters. The statistics were impressive. Over 500 communities had implemented some version of her preparedness model, training more than 50,000 volunteers and reaching populations exceeding 2 million people. Research studies documented consistent improvements in emergency outcomes for prepared communities, and the approach was being adopted by emergency management agencies throughout North America. But for Selena, the most meaningful measures of success remained personal. Letters from community members whose lives had been saved by trained neighbors. Thank you cards from elderly residents who no longer felt isolated during power outages. Photos from community events, where emergency response teams had evolved into broader neighborhood organizations that supported their members year-round. "You've created something that goes beyond emergency preparedness," Chief Williams told her during a ceremony marking the 5-year anniversary of the Riverside Heights program. "You've shown people how to build communities that actually take care of each other." The ceremony was held in the courtyard of the apartment complex where everything had started. Building C had been completely renovated with improved safety systems, and all 4 buildings now had active emergency response teams and building captains. Maria Santos, now the regional coordinator for community preparedness programs, served as master of ceremonies. "5 years ago, my children and I nearly died in a fire in this building," she told the assembled crowd. "We were saved by a woman who collected our garbage every week, someone we had never really noticed or thanked. Today, she has helped thousands of families learn to protect themselves and their neighbors." The audience included residents from throughout the region, emergency management officials, and representatives from the communities that had implemented preparedness programs. Miguel was there in his firefighter's uniform, Mrs. Chen with her building captain badge, and dozens of volunteers who had become community leaders through the training programs. "What Selena taught us," Maria continued, "is that heroes aren't just the people with badges and uniforms. Heroes are neighbors who know how to help, who are prepared to act, and who don't wait for someone else to solve problems they can handle themselves." Captain Torres, now the deputy fire chief, presented Selena with a commendation from the International Association of Fire Chiefs, recognizing her contributions to community emergency preparedness. "This award represents more than individual achievement," he said. "It recognizes an approach that has fundamentally changed how we think about community resilience." But the moment that meant the most to Selena came when the residents of Building C presented her with a simple plaque. It read, "To our neighbor Selena Rodriguez, who showed us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they care about each other." After the ceremony, Selena walked through the neighborhood one more time, following the route she had driven as a sanitation worker. The streets looked different now, not because the buildings had changed, but because she knew the stories behind every door, the networks of mutual support that connected every household. Mrs. Chen joined her for part of the walk. "I've been thinking about what you said 5 years ago," the elderly woman said, "that everyone has a past, and sometimes it's better left there. but I think you were wrong about one part." "How so?" "Your past wasn't something to leave behind. It was something to build on. Everything you learned as a pilot prepared you for what you're doing now. The difference is that now you're flying at ground level." Selina smiled at the metaphor. It was accurate in ways that Mrs. Chen probably didn't realize. Flying had taught her to see patterns from above, to understand how individual elements fit into larger systems, and to make quick decisions with incomplete information. Community preparedness required exactly those same skills, applied to social systems instead of mechanical ones. "Maybe you're right," Selina replied. "Maybe the point isn't to leave the past behind, but to find new ways to use what you've learned." As they reached the end of the block, Mrs. Chen pointed to a group of children playing in the courtyard. "Those kids will grow up in a community where people look out for each other, where neighbors know each other's names, where everyone has basic skills for helping during emergencies. They'll take that for granted because it's just how their world works." "That's the real victory," Selina agreed. "Not the programs or the awards, but the fact that caring for your community becomes normal instead of extraordinary." Chapter 13. Full Circle. The expansion of Selina's work had reached a point where she was managing programs across multiple states and consulting with international organizations. Her team now included dozens of trainers, researchers, and coordinators who carried the community preparedness model to new areas while adapting it to local conditions. Dr. Chen had joined her organization as research director, bringing academic rigor to the evaluation of program effectiveness. "We're documenting something unprecedented," he told her during one of their quarterly reviews. "Measurable improvements in community resilience that persist over time and spread to neighboring areas without direct intervention. The research was showing that communities with established preparedness programs were experiencing positive changes that went far beyond emergency response. Crime rates were declining, social isolation among elderly residents was decreasing, and local economic activity was increasing as neighborhood networks supported small businesses and community events. You've created a model for social capital development that happens to use emergency preparedness as its organizing principle," explained Dr. Park during a research conference where Selina's work was featured as a case study. "The emergency training brings people together, but once they're connected, they start solving other community problems as well." This broader impact was attracting attention from urban planners, public health officials, and community development specialists who were interested in adapting the model for their own purposes. Selina found herself consulting on projects that addressed neighborhood safety, elderly care, youth development, and economic revitalization. "The fundamental insight is the same across all these applications," she explained to a group of urban planning students. "Strong communities are built by people who know each other, trust each other, and have practical skills for solving problems together. Emergency preparedness is just one way to develop those relationships and capabilities." But success had also brought challenges that Selina hadn't anticipated. The demand for her consulting services far exceeded her capacity to provide them personally, leading to pressure to franchise or license the training methods to other organizations. Some government agencies wanted to mandate participation in community preparedness programs, potentially undermining the voluntary nature that was essential to their effectiveness. "You're facing the classic scaling problem," warned Chief Williams during one of their strategic planning sessions. "How do you maintain quality and community connection while expanding to serve larger populations?" There's always a tension between reach and depth. Selina had been grappling with this challenge for months, trying to find ways to expand the programs without losing the personal relationships and local knowledge that made them effective. The solution came from an unexpected source: the community coordinators themselves. Maria Santos had proposed creating a peer-to-peer training network where experienced coordinators from established programs would mentor new coordinators in developing areas. "We know what works because we've lived it," she argued. "We can teach other communities better than outside experts because we understand the challenges from the inside." The peer training model proved highly effective. Coordinators from rural areas worked with other rural communities. Urban coordinators focused on dense neighborhoods, and coastal coordinators specialized in hurricane and flood preparedness. Each training relationship was built on shared experience and mutual understanding rather than expert authority. "This is how knowledge should be transferred," observed Dr. Tanaka during a visit to observe the peer training program. "From practitioners to practitioners, with adaptation for local conditions rather than rigid adherence to standardized procedures." The peer network also provided ongoing support and quality control for established programs. Coordinators could consult with colleagues who had faced similar challenges, share innovations that worked in their communities, and collectively address problems that affected multiple areas. Miguel had become one of the most effective peer trainers, working with rural communities that needed to integrate volunteer fire departments with community preparedness teams. His combination of professional emergency response knowledge and community organizing experience made him particularly valuable for areas transitioning from purely volunteer emergency services to more structured preparedness programs. "It's come full circle," he told Selena during a break between training sessions. "5 years ago, you were teaching me about emergency response by example. Now I'm teaching other people the same lessons, adapted for their situations." The personal satisfaction of watching former students become teachers was one of the unexpected rewards of Selena's expanded role. She had helped create not just programs, but people who could create more programs, establishing a sustainable cycle of community development that could continue without her direct involvement.
The question led to a new phase of research and experimentation focused on preventive community development. Instead of waiting for communities to experience disasters and then teaching them to respond better, the team began working with stable communities to build resilience before crises occurred. "It's like preventive medicine for neighborhoods," explained Dr. Park. "Building social immunity before the disease arrives rather than treating symptoms after infection." This preventive approach required different strategies than emergency response training. Instead of organizing around dramatic scenarios like fires and floods, the programs focused on everyday challenges that required community cooperation. Caring for elderly neighbors, maintaining common spaces, supporting local businesses, and organizing informal education and recreation opportunities. The same skills that make communities effective during emergencies also make them healthier and more livable during normal times, Selena explained to a conference of public health officials. "Social connection, mutual assistance, collective problem solving, and local leadership. These are the building blocks of resilient communities regardless of what challenges they face." The preventive programs were more difficult to evaluate than emergency response training because their benefits were subtle and long-term. But early indicators were encouraging. Participating communities showed improvements in mental health indicators, reductions in social isolation, and increased civic participation. One of the most interesting discoveries was that communities with strong social networks were more resistant to various forms of manipulation and misinformation. When people know their neighbors personally and have established trust relationships, they're less susceptible to fear-based messaging and divisive rhetoric, observed Dr. Chen. Social capital appears to provide immunity against community polarization. This finding attracted attention from political scientists and democracy scholars who were concerned about increasing political division and declining civic participation in many communities. Selena found herself consulting on projects that used community preparedness as a framework for rebuilding democratic engagement at the local level. "Democracy works best at the scale where people can see the results of their participation," she explained to a group of civic leaders. "When neighbors work together to solve practical problems, they develop the skills and relationships necessary for broader democratic participation." The connection between community preparedness and democratic resilience became a focus of Selena's research and advocacy work. She argued that communities capable of organizing for emergency response were also capable of organizing for political action, community improvement, and resistance to authoritarian pressures. Preparedness isn't just about disasters, she told a congressional hearing on community resilience. It's about maintaining the social infrastructure that makes democracy possible. Communities that can take care of themselves are communities that can govern themselves. This broader vision attracted new types of supporters and funding sources, but it also created new challenges. Some political groups wanted to use community preparedness programs to advance partisan agendas, while others were suspicious of any program that encouraged local organization and self-reliance. "You're walking into a minefield," warned Chief Williams. "Once you start talking about democracy and political participation, you're going to be seen as taking sides regardless of how neutral you try to be." Selena was careful to keep the programs focused on practical skills and nonpartisan community building, but she couldn't avoid the broader implications of her work. Communities that learned to organize for emergency response did tend to become more politically active, though that activity took different forms depending on local conditions and leadership. "We can't control how people use the capabilities we help them develop," she told her staff during a strategy meeting. "Our job is to provide tools and training for community organization. How communities choose to use those tools is up to them." The political dimension of community preparedness became particularly relevant as the country faced increasing challenges from climate change, economic disruption, and social division. Communities with strong preparedness programs were better able to adapt to changing conditions and maintain stability during periods of broader uncertainty. "These communities are developing what we might call adaptive resilience," explained Dr. Chen during a research presentation. "Not just the ability to bounce back from specific disasters, but the capacity to evolve and adjust to ongoing challenges that require continuous adaptation."
10 years after the apartment fire that had changed everything, Selena stood before another audience, this time addressing the United Nations Global Conference on Community Resilience. Representatives from over 100 countries had gathered to share approaches for building disaster-resistant communities and addressing the challenges of climate change, urbanization, and social inequality. "Community preparedness isn't a luxury for wealthy societies," she told the international audience. "It's a necessity for any community that wants to survive and thrive in an uncertain world. The specific methods may vary, but the fundamental principle remains constant. People who know each other, trust each other, and have skills for helping each other are more resilient than people who depend entirely on outside assistance." Her presentation drew on examples from around the world, rural villages in Bangladesh that had reduced flood casualties through community early warning systems, urban neighborhoods in Mexico City that had organized effective earthquake response teams, and coastal communities in the Philippines that had developed innovative approaches to typhoon preparedness. "What we've learned," she continued, "is that effective preparedness programs must be built from the ground up, adapted to local conditions, and sustained by local leadership. Outside experts can provide technical assistance and training resources, but the programs themselves must belong to the communities they serve." The international conference marked a new phase in Selena's career. Instead of focusing primarily on domestic programs, she was now helping to establish a global network of community preparedness practitioners who could share experiences, adapt methods to different cultural contexts, and collectively address challenges that crossed national boundaries. "Climate change doesn't respect borders," she explained to the conference delegates. "Communities in different countries are facing similar challenges from sea level rise, extreme weather, and environmental migration. They can learn from each other's experiences and work together to develop solutions." The global network was organized around the same principles that had made the domestic programs successful: peer-to-peer learning, adaptation to local conditions, and focus on practical skills rather than theoretical frameworks. Community coordinators from different countries were paired for ongoing consultation and mutual support, creating relationships that transcended traditional diplomatic and academic channels. Maria Santos had become the international coordinator for the network, traveling regularly to work with communities in Central America, the Caribbean, and other regions with similar challenges to those she had experienced in Riverside Heights. "It's amazing how universal these needs are," she told Selena during a planning meeting. "The languages are different, the specific risks vary, but the fundamental desire to protect your family and help your neighbors is the same everywhere." The international work also brought new perspectives that enriched the domestic programs. Communities in other countries had developed innovative approaches to organization, communication, and resource sharing that could be adapted for use in American communities. "We're learning as much as we're teaching," reported Dr. Chen after a consultation trip to Japan. "The communities we're working with have centuries of experience with natural disasters and have developed sophisticated approaches to community resilience that we can adapt for our programs." One of the most significant innovations came from working with indigenous communities that had maintained traditional knowledge systems for environmental adaptation and social organization. These communities had preserved approaches to collective decision-making, resource management, and intergenerational knowledge transfer that offered valuable insights for modern preparedness programs. "Traditional knowledge isn't primitive or outdated," Selena explained to a conference of emergency management professionals. "It's time-tested wisdom about how humans can live sustainably in challenging environments. We need to learn from communities that have been practicing resilience for thousands of years." The integration of traditional knowledge with modern emergency management techniques created hybrid approaches that were both more effective and more culturally appropriate than purely technical solutions. Communities could maintain their cultural identity while developing capabilities for addressing contemporary challenges. As Selena reflected on the journey from sanitation worker to international consultant, she was struck by how much her understanding of heroism had evolved. 10 years ago, she had thought that leaving her aviation career meant giving up the opportunity to save lives. Now she understood that heroism took many forms and operated at many scales. The woman who checks on her elderly neighbor during a power outage is practicing the same principles as the pilot who flies into a storm to rescue crash survivors, she told a group of young emergency responders. Scale is different, visibility is different, but the core commitment to putting other people's welfare ahead of your own comfort is exactly the same. The neighborhood emergency response teams had become a normal part of community life in hundreds of cities and towns. Children grew up learning basic first aid and evacuation procedures as naturally as they learned to read and write. Elderly residents had networks of neighbors who checked on them regularly and knew how to help during emergencies. Local businesses participated in preparedness planning and supported community response capabilities. "We've normalized caring," Mrs. Chen observed during one of her regular visits with Selena. At 92, she was still active as a building captain and mentor for younger volunteers. "When I was young, people helped their neighbors because it was expected. Then for a while, people became isolated and individualistic. Now we're returning to community responsibility, but with better organization and training." Epilogue. The continuing story. 15 years after discovering that a sanitation worker could save lives as effectively as a helicopter pilot, Selena Rodriguez continued to work at the intersection of individual capability and community resilience. The programs she had helped create were no longer dependent on her personal involvement. They had become self-sustaining networks of mutual support that adapted continuously to changing conditions and emerging challenges. The apartment complex where everything began had become something of a pilgrimage site for emergency management professionals and community organizers from around the world. Building C, completely renovated after the fire, housed a small museum and training center where visitors could learn about the evolution of community-based preparedness programs. "This is where it started," Maria Santos would tell groups of visitors, standing in the courtyard where children still played while their parents watched from benches. One person decided to help her neighbors, and that decision changed how thousands of communities think about taking care of each other. Miguel, now the fire chief of Riverside Heights, had made community preparedness a central element of his department's mission. "We've learned that preventing emergencies is just as important as responding to them," he would explain to visiting delegations. "And prevention happens at the community level, with neighbors helping neighbors before professional responders even know there's a problem." The research data accumulated over 15 years provided compelling evidence for the effectiveness of community-based approaches to resilience. Communities with active preparedness programs consistently showed better outcomes across a wide range of measures: lower casualty rates during disasters, faster recovery from emergencies, reduced crime, improved public health indicators, and higher levels of civic participation. "What we've documented," Dr. Chen explained in his final research report before retirement, "is that social capital, the networks of trust and mutual assistance that connect community members, is the foundation of resilience. Emergency preparedness training is just one way to build that capital, but it's a particularly effective way because it gives people concrete skills and immediate reasons to work together." Selena herself had evolved from practitioner to theorist to advocate, but she maintained her connection to the practical work of community building. She still lived in Riverside Heights, still knew the names of her neighbors, and still participated in the local emergency response team despite her international responsibilities. "I learned something important from my years as a sanitation worker," she would tell audiences at conferences and universities. "The most important work often happens without recognition or fanfare. The garbage collector who notices a gas leak, the neighbor who checks on an elderly resident, the volunteer who teaches basic first aid, these people are the foundation of community resilience." Her message resonated because it was based on lived experience rather than academic theory. She had been the person collecting garbage, the person responding to emergencies, and the person organizing communities to take care of themselves. She understood both the challenges and the possibilities from the inside. "Heroism isn't about dramatic rescues or extraordinary individual achievements," she would conclude her presentations. "It's about ordinary people doing what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, because they care about their community. Sometimes that means climbing into a burning building. Sometimes it means teaching your neighbor how to shut off the gas valve. Both matter. Both save lives. Both make communities stronger." The story of Selena Rodriguez had become larger than any individual biography. It represented a model of service that transcended professional boundaries, a demonstration that people could reinvent themselves while building on their existing skills, and evidence that communities could become more resilient by recognizing and organizing the capabilities that already existed among their members. As she approached her 67th birthday, Selena was training the next generation of community preparedness coordinators to carry on the work. Some were former military personnel looking for ways to continue serving after retirement. Others were teachers, nurses, social workers, and volunteers who had discovered aptitudes for emergency response and community organization. "The future of this work belongs to people like you," she told her latest group of trainees. "People who understand that communities are strongest when everyone contributes their skills and knowledge to the common good. My job is just to help you recognize capabilities you already have and learn to use them more effectively." The sanitation truck still rumbled through the streets of Riverside Heights every Tuesday and Friday, operated now by a young woman named Jessica, who had been inspired by Selena's example to seek work that served her community directly. Jessica didn't have aviation experience, but she had been a teacher, and she understood the importance of paying attention to details that others might miss. "I'm learning the same lessons," Jessica told Selena during one of their occasional conversations. "You see everything when you work in a community every day. You know who needs help, what problems are developing, where resources are needed. It's a different kind of preparation for emergency response."
The circle was complete, but the story continued. New challenges emerged. Cyber attacks that could disrupt communication systems, climate change impacts that required adaptation as well as response, social divisions that threatened the trust necessary for effective community cooperation. But the fundamental approach remained constant: help people know each other, trust each other, and develop skills for helping each other. Every generation faces different challenges, Selena reflected during a quiet moment in her garden where she grew vegetables that she shared with neighbors who couldn't maintain their own gardens. But the basic human needs for safety, connection, and purpose remain the same. Communities that can meet those needs for all their members are communities that can survive and thrive regardless of what challenges they face. The story of the Silent Guardian had become a story of community transformation, demonstrating that heroism was not about individual glory, but about collective resilience. It showed that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they worked together, and that the most important revolutions often began with simple acts of neighborly care. As the sun set over Riverside Heights, children played in courtyards where emergency response teams had been born. Elderly residents sat on porches knowing that neighbors would check on them during the next power outage, and adults went to sleep confident that their community could take care of itself during whatever challenges the future might bring. The Silent Guardian had become a community of guardians, watching over each other with the same quiet dedication that had once motivated a sanitation worker to climb into a burning building to save her neighbor's children. The story continued in thousands of small acts of preparation, cooperation, and care that never made headlines but made communities stronger every day. Some heroes wear uniforms. Others carry clipboards and teach first aid classes. Some fly helicopters. Others drive garbage trucks. All of them share the understanding that service to others is the highest calling, and that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they care enough to try. The end was just another beginning. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.